A 7-foot black woman laughed at the idea of breeding with a cowboy, until she got pregnant. The towering blacksmith's apprentice throws back her head in genuine amusement as the saloon erupts with crude jokes about her romantic prospects. The townspeople see only a curiosity, too tall, too dark, too strong for any respectable man to desire. They assume she'll remain forever alone, working iron until her dying day. But a broken-down deputy marshal, drowning his war demons in whiskey, watches from the shadows with different eyes. What none of them know is that beneath their mockery lies a secret inheritance that will transform everything: her wealth, her power, and her place in this unforgiving frontier town. When unexpected money collides with forbidden attraction, will love triumph over a community determined to keep them apart? Or will the very forces that brought them together ultimately destroy them both? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The hammer struck red-hot iron with thunderous precision. Ezra Washington stood 7 feet tall in Murphy's blacksmith shop, her powerful arms shaping horseshoes that would have challenged any 2 ordinary men. Sweat glistened on her dark skin as she worked, each strike echoing through the dusty streets of Copper Ridge. Outside, cowboys gathered at the saloon's wooden porch, their voices carrying on the desert wind. They spoke of women and marriage, of finding wives to bear their children. One grizzled rancher spat into the dirt and pointed toward the blacksmith shop. "What about Big Ez in there? Any man brave enough for that mountain of a woman?" Laughter erupted from the group. The idea seemed absurd to them all. Ezra heard every word through the open doorway. She had grown accustomed to such comments over the past 3 years in Copper Ridge. The townsfolk saw her as a curiosity, useful for heavy labor but hardly suitable for companionship. Deputy Marshal Sam Mackenzie stumbled past the saloon, his badge tarnished and his clothes wrinkled from another sleepless night. The war had ended 10 years ago, but the memories still haunted him. Whiskey had become his closest companion, though it provided little comfort. He paused near the blacksmith shop, drawn by the rhythmic hammering. Through the door had become increasingly problematic. Now he seemed drawn to the tall woman everyone whispered about. Such associations could only lead to trouble. At the end of Main Street, Doc Henry Sullivan sorted through his morning mail with trembling hands. 3 letters bore familiar handwriting that made his stomach clench. He had been dreading this correspondence for months, knowing it would eventually arrive. The secrets he carried weighed heavily on his conscience. One letter contained legal documents that would change everything. Doc glanced toward the blacksmith shop, then quickly stuffed the papers into his medical bag. The time had not yet come for revelations. Evening brought the monthly town dance to Murphy's barn. Lanterns cast flickering shadows across the wooden floor as couples spun to fiddle music. Ezra stood in the corner, having attended more out of habit than hope. She wore her finest dress, though finding clothing for her unusual height remained a constant challenge. The cowboys from the afternoon saloon gathering had consumed considerable whiskey. Their earlier jokes about Ezra grew louder and cruder as the night progressed. One man raised his voice above the music. "Look there, boys. Still no dance partner for our Amazon. Reckon we need to import some giant from back east." His companions roared with laughter. Other townspeople turned to stare, some smirking at the crude humor. Martha Cornwell watched from her position near the refreshment table, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Such displays reflected poorly on the community she worked to civilize. Ezra maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened slightly. She had endured worse humiliations than drunken cowboys. The war had taught her about true hardship and survival. These men knew nothing of real struggle. Sam Mackenzie leaned against the barn wall, whiskey heavy on his breath. The cruel laughter stirred something in his chest, a familiar anger he recognized from battlefield injustices. Without conscious thought, he stepped forward. Maybe you boys should mind your own affairs." The cowboys turned toward him, surprised by the interruption. Sam's reputation as a war veteran earned him grudging respect, even in his current, deteriorated state. The lead cowboy studied the deputy's face, noting the dangerous glint in his eyes. "Just having some fun," Marshall felt comfortable, rather than awkward. At her doorway, Ezra finally broke the quiet. "Thank you." Sam nodded and tipped his hat before disappearing into the darkness. Ezra watched him go, wondering if anyone in Copper Ridge truly understood the battles that shaped them both. Doc Sullivan sat in his office long after midnight, the unopened letters spread across his desk. Tomorrow would bring decisions he had postponed for too long. The inheritance documents demanded action, and Ezra deserved to know the truth about her past. The secret he carried could transform her life completely, elevating her from town outcast to one of Copper Ridge's wealthiest residents. But such revelations always carried consequences, especially for a woman who already faced so much scrutiny. Outside his window, the town slept peacefully, unaware that everything was about to change. Doc Sullivan's hands shook as he approached the blacksmith shop 3 days after the town dance. The legal documents in his leather satchel felt heavier than any medical equipment he had ever carried. Ezra looked up from her anvil, sweat beading on her forehead despite the morning chill. "Doc, you look like you've seen a ghost." He gestured toward 2 wooden chairs near the shop's entrance. His usual steady demeanor had cracked, revealing the anxiety he had carried for months. Ezra set down her hammer and followed him, curious about his unusual behavior. "Ezra, I have news about your past. About your former master, Thomas Whitmore." Her body tensed at the mention of that name. She had rarely spoken of her life before freedom, preferring to focus on the present rather than painful memories. Doc pulled the documents from his satchel with trembling fingers. "Thomas Whitmore died 8 months ago. He left you something in his will." Ezra stared at the official papers, unable to comprehend their meaning. The legal language seemed foreign and impossible. Doc cleared his throat and continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You've inherited his entire estate. The ranch, the livestock, and a considerable sum of money. You're now one of the wealthiest people in the Arizona Territory." The hammer slipped from Ezra's fingers and clattered to the ground. She had spent 3 years scraping together enough before he died, asking me to watch over you and ensure you received your inheritance. Ezra stood and walked to the shop's entrance, staring out at Main Street. Everything looked the same, but her world had fundamentally shifted in the span of 10 minutes. The townspeople who had mocked her the night before would now discover she possessed more wealth than most of them combined. Word of Ezra's inheritance spread through Copper Ridge faster than a prairie fire. By noon, a steady stream of visitors appeared at the blacksmith shop. People who had never acknowledged her existence suddenly remembered urgent business requiring her attention. Sam Mackenzie heard the news at the marshal's office from a breathless bank clerk. His first thought was relief that Ezra would never again face the financial struggles he had witnessed. His second thought was concern about how this change might affect their tentative friendship. Martha Cornwell received the information during her afternoon tea with the town's leading ladies. Her porcelain cup rattled against its saucer as she processed the implications. A wealthy woman of color in Copper Ridge would upset the social order she had spent years establishing. "This changes everything," she murmured to her guests. "We must be very careful about how we handle this situation." The women around her table nodded in agreement, though their motivations varied considerably. Some genuinely worried about social disruption, while others calculated potential benefits from befriending the newly wealthy Ezra Washington. That evening, Ezra sat in her small cabin, surrounded by legal documents and bank statements that detailed her transformed circumstances. The numbers seemed abstract and unreal. She owned more land than she could walk across in a full day. The livestock alone was worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Sam Mackenzie stood on her doorstep, hat in hand and looking more sober than she had seen him in weeks. She invited him inside, grateful for familiar company during this overwhelming day. "Congratulations," he said simply, "though I imagine it feels strange rather than celebratory." Ezra nodded, appreciating his understanding. Sam had always possessed an ability to see beyond surface appearances. He studied her face carefully, noting the mixture of wonder and worry in her expression. "What will you do with it all?" "They treat you now," he warned gently. "Some will be genuine, but others will only see what they can gain." Ezra had already observed this shift throughout the day. Men who had previously avoided eye contact suddenly tipped their hats respectfully. Women who had whispered cruel comments now offered warm greetings. The transformation felt hollow and calculated. "What about you, Sam? Will this change things between us?" He met her gaze directly, his expression serious and honest. The question had been weighing on his mind since hearing the news. Their friendship had developed when she possessed nothing but her strength and integrity. "You're still the same person who showed kindness to a broken-down trunk. Money doesn't change that." Relief flooded through Ezra at his words. She had feared that her new circumstances might create barriers between them. Sam's consistency provided an anchor in a day full of dramatic changes. Martha Cornwell stood at her parlor window, watching Sam leave Ezra's cabin well after dark. The sight confirmed her worst fears about their developing relationship. A wealthy woman of color with political influence posed enough challenges. A romantic alliance with the deputy marshal could completely undermine the social structure Martha had worked so hard to maintain. She turned away from the window and began composing a letter to her cousin, a judge in the territorial capital. Desperate times required decisive action. 2 weeks after the inheritance revelation, Ezra's new wealth had begun transforming Copper Ridge in unexpected ways. She purchased winter coats for the school children and paid overdue medical bills for 3 struggling families. Her generosity earned genuine gratitude from those she helped, creating the first real friendships of her adult life. Sam Mackenzie found himself visiting her cabin most evenings after his marshal rounds. Their conversations had evolved from cautious pleasantries to deeper discussions about their shared experiences of loss and isolation. The war had taken his brother and left him with nightmares. Slavery had stolen her childhood and family connections. "I never expected to find peace in this place," Sam admitted one evening as they sat on her front porch. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Ezra watched his profile in the fading light, noting how his face had lost some of its haunted expression, creating a growing faction opposed to what they saw as a dangerous social precedent. "Think of what this means for our children," Martha declared to her assembled supporters. "If we allow such arrangements to flourish, what becomes of proper society?" The women nodded solemnly, though privately, some admired Ezra's charitable works and questioned Martha's harsh judgment. Fear of social ostracism kept their doubts silent, allowing Martha's narrative to spread unchallenged through the respectable households. Doc Sullivan watched the developing romance with mixed emotions. His guilt over the family's past made him protective of Ezra's happiness, but he understood the challenges they would face. Mixed relationships in frontier towns often ended in tragedy, regardless of the participants' wealth or character. He had been receiving more correspondence from legal contacts in the territorial capital. Martha's inquiries about challenging the inheritance had reached official channels. Someone with influence was asking detailed questions about the will's validity and Thomas Whitmore's mental state when he drafted it. 3 months into their courtship, Ezra began experiencing morning sickness that she initially attributed to spoiled food or seasonal illness. The symptoms persisted for 2 weeks before she consulted Doc Sullivan, who confirmed her pregnancy with a mixture of joy and concern. She walked home from his office in a daze, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. The child growing inside her represented everything she had once laughed about during those cruel saloon conversations. The idea of breeding with a cowboy had seemed absurd when she possessed nothing but her strength and determination. Now she carried the deputy marshal's baby, a mixed-race child who would enter a world already hostile to their parents' relationship. The timing felt simultaneously perfect and catastrophic. She had found love and purpose in Copper Ridge, but pregnancy would escalate every existing conflict. Sam's reaction exceeded her hopes when she told him that evening. He knelt beside her chair and placed his weathered hand gently over hers, his eyes bright with tears of happiness. The child would give him a family he had never dared hope for since the war destroyed his previous dreams. "We'll face whatever comes together," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "This baby will be born into love, regardless of what others think." His relationship's trajectory. A mixed-race child born to wealthy parents would challenge every social convention she held dear. She accelerated her legal campaign against Ezra's inheritance, reasoning that removing the wealth would eliminate the relationship's foundation. Her correspondence with Territorial Judge Harrison had yielded promising results. He agreed to review the will's legitimacy based on questions about Thomas Whitmore's mental competency. The judge's arrival in Copper Ridge was scheduled for the following month. Martha had gathered testimony from several witnesses who claimed Thomas Whitmore had shown signs of mental deterioration before his death. She felt confident the inheritance could be overturned, returning Ezra to her previous powerless state. Sam's marriage proposal became public knowledge when he purchased a ring from the town's only jewelry merchant. The news divided Copper Ridge's population more sharply than any previous controversy. Families found themselves arguing across dinner tables about race, love, and social progress. The schoolteacher supported the couple, having witnessed Ezra's kindness toward the children. The bank president opposed them, fearing economic disruption if other unconventional relationships followed. The minister remained publicly neutral, while privately struggling with his conscience about performing the ceremony. Ezra's pregnancy symptoms intensified as community tensions escalated. Morning sickness confined her to bed several days each week, making her vulnerable to the whispered accusations spreading through town. Some claimed she had deliberately trapped Sam with pregnancy to secure her social position. Doc Sullivan's anxiety reached breaking point as he prepared for Judge Harrison's arrival. His testimony would be crucial to defending the inheritance, but revealing his true identity as Thomas Whitmore's brother might create new complications. The family connection could be seen as bias rather than authentic knowledge of his brother's final wishes. Sam spent his evenings at Ezra's cabin, helping with household tasks as her energy waned. He had never imagined domestic happiness could feel so complete, even amid external hostility. The coming child represented hope for a future beyond the war's long shadow. Martha Cornwell's final preparations included arranging accommodations for Judge Harrison and scheduling private meetings with her supporting witnesses. Victory seemed within reach, promising to restore Copper Ridge's social order before the dangerous precedent became permanent. Judge Harrison had become visible despite her loose-fitting dresses. The sight of her growing belly intensified the whispered conversations that followed her through town. Some residents crossed the street to avoid acknowledging her condition, while others stared openly with mixtures of curiosity and disapproval. Sam's commitment to their relationship had cost him several friendships among the town's establishment. The bank president no longer acknowledged his greetings, and 2 prominent ranchers had requested a different deputy handle their business affairs. His reputation as a war hero provided some protection, but even that shield was weakening under constant social pressure. Martha's first witness was a former ranch hand, who claimed Thomas Whitmore had shown signs of mental confusion during his final months. The man testified that his employer had spoken to deceased relatives and forgotten recent conversations. His testimony painted a picture of an addled mind, incapable of making sound legal decisions. Mr. Whitmore talked to his dead wife like she was sitting right there in the parlor, the ranch hand told Judge Harrison during a preliminary interview. Seemed like he was living more in the past than the present toward the end. The judge recorded these statements with careful attention, though his expression remained neutral. Martha watched from across the hotel lobby, satisfied with her witness preparation. 2 other men would provide similar testimony about Thomas Whitmore's declining mental state. Doc Sullivan spent sleepless nights reviewing his brother's letters, searching for evidence of clear thinking during the will's creation. Thomas had written extensively about his reasons for freeing Ezra and leaving her the inheritance. The correspondence revealed careful planning rather than impulsive generosity from a confused mind. Anonymous threats began appearing under Ezra's door and Sam's office window. The messages warned of consequences if they proceeded with their marriage plans. Someone had been watching their movements closely enough to know their daily routines and favorite meeting places. Sam increased his patrols around Ezra's cabin and began carrying his rifle more frequently during official duties. The threats felt credible, rather than empty intimidation. Desperation often drove reasonable people to unreasonable actions, and the social tensions had reached dangerous levels. Local businesses found themselves choosing sides in the controversy more conservatively, rather than giving it away to undeserving recipients. Judge Harrison toured the disputed ranch property 3 days before the formal hearing. The land showed signs of excellent management under Thomas Whitmore's ownership. Cattle grazed on healthy grasslands, and the buildings were well maintained, despite months without active supervision. The inheritance represented genuine value rather than worthless property. Sam's drinking had stopped completely since learning of Ezra's pregnancy, but the stress of constant hostility tested his resolve daily. He found himself staring at whiskey bottles in the saloon, remembering how alcohol had once numbed emotional pain. Ezra's steady presence kept him sober, but the temptation never fully disappeared. Doc Sullivan received an unexpected visitor on Thursday evening when Martha Cornwell appeared at his medical office. She had come to pressure him into supporting her case against the inheritance. Her approach combined veiled threats about his own reputation with promises of social acceptance if he cooperated. "You know as well as anyone that Thomas Whitmore was not in his right mind," Martha declared. "Your testimony could end this unfortunate situation before it causes more damage to our community." Doc's hands trembled as he organized his medical supplies, buying time while considering his response. Martha's offer was tempting, promising an end to the anxiety that had consumed him for months, but betraying his brother's final wishes would destroy any chance of redemption for his family's past sins. The formal hearing was scheduled for Saturday morning in the town hall. Both sides had prepared their arguments and assembled their evidence. The outcome would determine whether Ezra retained her wealth and social position or returned to the powerless state Martha preferred. Ezra spent Friday evening with Sam, discussing their future regardless of the hearing's outcome. They had saved enough money to leave Copper Ridge if necessary, though starting over in another territory would be difficult with a baby coming. Her inheritance had given them options, but love had given them determination to survive whatever challenges lay ahead. "Even if we lose everything tomorrow, we still have each other," Sam said as they sat together in her cabin. His hand rested gently on her rounded belly, feeling their child's movements beneath his palm. The baby seemed active tonight, perhaps sensing the tension surrounding its parents, revealing secrets he had kept hidden for years. Truth sometimes demanded personal sacrifice, and his brother deserved better than the grave's silence. The future of Copper Ridge would be decided in less than 12 hours. The town hall filled beyond capacity on Saturday morning as residents gathered for the inheritance hearing. Judge Harrison took his position behind a makeshift bench, constructed from the schoolteacher's desk. His stern expression revealed nothing about his intentions as he surveyed the crowded room. Martha Cornwell sat in the front row, flanked by her 3 witnesses and several prominent supporters. Her confidence radiated through perfect posture and carefully arranged clothing that proclaimed her social authority. She had prepared for this moment for months, certain that justice would restore proper order to Copper Ridge. Ezra entered the hall with Sam at her side, her pregnancy now impossible to conceal despite her best efforts. Hostile stares followed their progress to seats near the back of the room. Several families who had benefited from her generosity offered encouraging smiles, though they remained outnumbered by Martha's supporters. Doc Sullivan sat alone in the middle section, a leather satchel containing crucial documents resting at his feet. His hands shook slightly as he reviewed handwritten notes he had prepared during sleepless nights. The moment for truth had finally arrived, bringing both relief and terror in equal measure. Judge Harrison called the proceedings to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. Martha's first witness took the stand and repeated his prepared testimony about Thomas Whitmore's mental decline. The ranch hand described conversations with invisible people and forgotten instructions that painted a picture of advanced senility. "He couldn't remember my name half the time, even though I'd worked for him near 5 years," the witness declared. Seemed like his mind was mostly gone by the end. The second witness provided similar testimony, claiming Thomas Whitmore had given contradictory orders and shown confusion about basic ranch operations. His account suggested an elderly man losing his grip on reality, making the generous inheritance appear to be the product of diminished mental capacity. Martha's third witness delivered the most damaging testimony, describing instances where Thomas Whitmore had mistaken him for deceased relatives and carried on conversations with empty chairs. Testimony supporting the inheritance's validity. The room fell silent as residents waited to see who might defend Ezra's claim. Several seconds passed without movement before Doc Sullivan rose slowly from his seat. "Your Honor, I have evidence that Thomas Whitmore was of sound mind when he drafted his will." Doc approached the front of the room with measured steps, his medical bag in one hand and the leather satchel in the other. Martha's confident expression flickered as she realized she had not anticipated his involvement in the proceedings. "I am Dr. Henry Sullivan, and I have been treating patients in Copper Ridge for 4 years," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But what many people don't know is that my real name is Henry Whitmore, and Thomas Whitmore was my older brother." Gasps echoed through the packed hall as residents absorbed this stunning revelation. Ezra stared at Doc in amazement, finally understanding his protective behavior and mysterious anxiety. Sam leaned forward in his seat, recognizing the courage required for such a public confession. Martha's face went pale as her carefully constructed case began crumbling before her eyes. She had not known about the family connection, which explained Doc's intimate knowledge of Thomas Whitmore's final months and his unwavering support for Ezra's inheritance claim. "I changed my name when I came west because I wanted to escape our family's association with slavery," Doc continued, pulling letters from his satchel. "But Thomas wrote to me regularly, and these letters prove he was mentally sharp until the day he died." Judge Harrison examined the correspondence with careful attention, noting dates and handwriting quality. The letters revealed detailed planning for the inheritance, including specific instructions about legal procedures and explanations for his decision to free Ezra and provide for her future. "Thomas felt guilty about our family's past and wanted to make amends," Doc explained. "He had been planning this inheritance for over 2 years, consulting with lawyers and ensuring every detail was legally sound." The letters contained explicit references to the witnesses Martha had presented, with Thomas noting their tendency to exaggerate problems and spread gossip. He had anticipated attempts to challenge his mental competency and had documented his clear thinking on multiple occasions. "Your Honor, I have medical. Several minutes reviewing all the documents before addressing the packed courtroom. His expression had shifted from neutral observation to clear resolution as the evidence mounted in Ezra's favor. "The inheritance is valid," he announced. "Thomas Whitmore was clearly of sound mind when he drafted his will, and his wishes will be honored according to territorial law." Martha Cornwell's composure finally cracked as her months of planning ended in complete failure. Her witnesses looked embarrassed by their exposed lies, and several supporters quietly left the building rather than face the social consequences of backing the losing side. Ezra felt tears streaming down her face as relief flooded through her body. Sam's arm tightened around her shoulders as they absorbed the magnitude of their victory. Their child would be born into security and legitimacy, protected by both wealth and law. Doc Sullivan packed his evidence with steady hands, finally free from the burden of secrets he had carried for so long. His brother's redemption was complete, and justice had prevailed through truth rather than manipulation. The community would never be quite the same after witnessing this dramatic reversal of fortune. 3 weeks after Judge Harrison's ruling, the town hall hosted another gathering that would reshape Copper Ridge's social landscape. Ezra Washington stood at the altar in a white dress, specially tailored for her height and condition. Her pregnancy, now a visible symbol of the new life growing within their transformed community. Sam Mackenzie wore his finest suit, his hands steady and his eyes clear as he prepared to speak the vows that would make their union official. The war's shadows had lifted from his face, replaced by the peaceful expression of a man who had found his purpose in protecting and loving his growing family. Doc Sullivan performed the ceremony in his capacity as the town's most respected professional, having been ordained years earlier in his medical training. His revelation about being Thomas Whitmore's brother had elevated his status rather than diminishing it, as the community recognized his courage in speaking truth despite personal cost. The church pews held a surprising mix of attendees. Families who had benefited from Ezra's charity sat alongside ranchers who had initially opposed the relationship. The school teacher wept openly with joy, while the bank president maintained dignified composure, despite his earlier objections to their romance. Martha Cornwell attended the ceremony. This moment. Lanterns cast the same flickering shadows, but the atmosphere had transformed from mockery to genuine celebration of love, conquering social barriers. 2 months later, Ezra gave birth to a healthy daughter during a spring thunderstorm that seemed to herald the child's arrival with dramatic flourish. Doc Sullivan attended the delivery with skilled hands and deep emotion, knowing this baby represented the culmination of his family's journey from shame to redemption. The infant possessed her father's green eyes and her mother's strong features, creating a unique beauty that silenced any remaining critics of the union. Sam held his daughter with trembling fingers, amazed that something so perfect could emerge from a world that had tried so hard to prevent her existence. Ezra recovered quickly from childbirth, her natural strength serving her well during the challenging weeks that followed. Nursing sessions provided quiet moments for her to process how dramatically her life had changed, from town outcast to respected wife and mother in less than a year. Sam constructed a cradle from oak wood he had personally selected and seasoned, carving intricate patterns that told the story of their courtship and triumph over adversity. The finished piece became a family heirloom that would remind future generations of the love that created their lineage. Martha Cornwell's influence continued declining as more residents embraced the changes Ezra's presence had brought to Copper Ridge. The widow found herself increasingly isolated, though she maintained her dignity while adapting to her reduced circumstances within the community's new social structure. Doc Sullivan opened a larger medical practice, with assistance from Ezra's continued financial support. His expertise and honesty had earned him widespread respect, transforming him from a nervous secret keeper into one of the town's most trusted leaders, alongside his sister-in-law. The ranch that came with Ezra's inheritance flourished under Sam's management, and her strategic investments in improved breeding stock and modern equipment. Their success demonstrated that prosperity could grow from love and hard work, rather than just inherited privilege or social connections. Ezra established a school fund that provided education opportunities for controversial pregnancy to beloved community member. Children who had initially stared at her unusual heritage now played with her naturally, suggesting that future generations would inherit fewer prejudices than their parents. Martha Cornwell approached Ezra during the birthday festivities, offering a formal apology for her previous behavior. The conversation was brief but genuine, acknowledging the wisdom of accepting change rather than fighting inevitable social progress. Their reconciliation removed the last barrier to community harmony. Sam's reputation as deputy marshal had been enhanced by his personal transformation from troubled veteran to dedicated family man. His sobriety and commitment to justice earned respect from residents who had previously questioned his fitness for the position. Leadership emerged from personal growth rather than just authority. Ezra's laughter could often be heard echoing through Main Street as she conducted business or visited with neighbors who had become genuine friends. The sound that had once been directed at the absurd idea of breeding with a cowboy now celebrated the joy that such unexpected love had brought to her life. Doc Sullivan often reflected on how truth had ultimately freed everyone involved in the inheritance controversy. His decision to reveal family secrets had painful moments, but ultimately provided the foundation for lasting happiness and community healing. As autumn arrived in Copper Ridge, Ezra stood on her front porch, watching Sam teach their daughter to walk in the front yard. The woman who had once been mocked as too tall, too different, and too isolated to find love, now possessed everything she had never dared to dream possible. The frontier town had learned that acceptance created stronger communities than exclusion, and that love could indeed conquer the barriers that fear and prejudice constructed between human hearts.